The gray dawn of June 6, 1944, on Normandy's shores brought more than the roar of tides. It brought a soldier who defied German logic. From behind concrete slits, Wehrmacht sentinels watched in shock as a Canadian scout ignored machine gun fire. Leo Major didn't seek cover. He moved through the dunes like an apparition, with a coldness that enemy reports later described as inhuman. To the soldiers in the bunkers, he was a predator moving with a lethality that ignored fear itself. Surviving officers at Juno Beach detailed the terror of watching elite units decimated by a man who seemed to know where every mine was buried. While others advanced in mass, Major operated alone, emerging from the fog to strike lethal blows before vanishing. For the enemy, this first contact was the birth of a myth, a man who could not be hit by German steel. He was a shadow that turned their defense into a labyrinth of dread, moving with a precision that felt like a death sentence. German reports began to document a phantom scout who moved with impossible silence, stalking patrols through the coastal ruins. To the enemy, his presence was a constant, unseen threat that broke their morale before the main assault even arrived. He didn't behave like a regular infantryman. He was a hunter who treated the battlefield as his own territory. This was the beginning of the Ghost, a name that would soon become synonymous with German failure and Canadian legend. In the ruins of Normandy, Major's path collided with an SS patrol in a brutal clash. A phosphorus grenade exploded, blinding his left eye, yet he refused to retreat. German accounts describe a man bathed in blood and light who kept firing with chilling precision. To the SS, he wasn't a wounded soldier. He was a demon who defied biology, proving that even half-blind, he was more lethal than an entire squad. Moving through the smoke like an unstoppable force of nature, news of a sniper with an eye patch spread through the Wehrmacht like a plague. Prisoners spoke of a pirate who didn't need two eyes to find their hearts. German command saw his persistence as a fanatical anomaly. His eye patch became a psychological mark of vengeance, making him an iconic figure of terror. Soldiers felt watched by a single relentless gaze that never missed, turning his injury into a symbol of tactical dread that haunted every trench and ruined building. German diaries from the Cannes sector reveal the deep paranoia surrounding this one-eyed hunter. To the enemy, his mutilation hadn't weakened him, it had sharpened his instincts. They stopped seeing him as a man and started seeing him as a vengeful specter. The sight of his silhouette on the horizon was enough to demoralize experienced units, as they realized this ghost would haunt them from the beaches of France to the heart of the Netherlands without ever slowing down. On the muddy dikes of the Scheldt, silence was a trap. A German commander reported the moment reality fragmented. Two of his scouts returned from the mist, but they were not alone. Behind them, a figure with an eye patch pointed a Sten gun, demanding the surrender of the entire unit. To the Germans, surrounded by swamp and exhaustion, that lone man seemed like the vanguard of a massive division watching from the shadows, ready for a massacre that felt entirely inevitable. Panic peaked as the column of prisoners began to march. SS troops, positioned on a nearby ridge, saw not a strategic surrender, but a cowardly betrayal. The account of a German survivor is excruciating. They were gunned down by their own compatriots. As Major ran to protect them, the German soldiers realized the bitter paradox of that day. The Canadian enemy was trying to save their lives, while their own leaders executed them in the mud, shattering their remaining morale. By the day's end, 93 German soldiers had been captured by a single man. In interrogations, disbelief was the dominant note. They spoke of a shadow demon who had manipulated them like pieces on a board. For the German command, the loss of that company was not just a military casualty, but a moral collapse. Major's legend grew as a specter that could break German discipline with his mere audacious presence, turning their fear into a final, silent surrender. At the gates of Zwolle, silence was shattered by a German burst that changed everything. Weli Arsenault, the only man Major called brother, fell lifeless in the snow. Across the line, the German soldier who fired felt a chill. He hadn't just eliminated an enemy, but unleashed a monster. Major's grief didn't manifest in tears, but in a silent promise that Zwolle would be taken by his own vengeful fury. transforming his personal loss into a lethal weapon in the dark. For German sentries in Zwolle, the night became a puzzle of fire and smoke. Reports described figures firing from impossible angles, followed by grenade blasts that seemed to come from an invisible, coordinated army. The German command issued desperate radio alerts, convinced a full paratrooper division had landed. Little did they know the chaos was the solitary choreography of one man, using the darkness to amplify the weight of his grief against an entire garrison. Inside a local pub, an Alsatian officer felt the cold steel of a steam gun against his neck. His account is a testament to Major's psychological war. He described a man with a frozen gaze who, in perfect French, delivered an ultimatum. The shelling begins at 6. Leave now or die. Panic seized the high command. Major's lie, told with a hangman's conviction, began to dismantle months of German occupation, as the myth of the ghost proved more effective than any artillery. Panic engulfed the German barracks as flames from the Gestapo headquarters lit up the Zwolle sky. Fleeing soldiers reported that the streets were infested with Canadian commandos appearing from every corner with relentless aggression. On the radio, screams and conflicting orders filled the air. Convinced the siege was total, the garrison abandoned their positions to escape a bombardment that existed only in Major's mind, a psychological defeat that turned defense into a scramble for survival. At the Zwolle riverbanks, panic turned into a disorganized retreat. Arrogant officers pushed their men to cross the water, fearing the ghost army hunting them. Small groups surrendered to a lone figure emerging from the gloom, handing over weapons without resistance. For them, defeat was not to a man, but to a supernatural force that had devoured the city's defense in one night. The terror of the unknown had shattered their discipline, making one man seem like an invincible brigade. As dawn broke, the few Germans hiding in the shadows watched in disbelief. There were no tanks or regiments, only a single exhausted soldier with an eye patch walking through silent streets. The German humiliation was complete. The collective panic had been orchestrated by one indomitable will. Major had proven that the perception of enemy strength is deadlier than reality, transforming a whole garrison into ghosts of their own cowardice as they fled a phantom that never truly existed. Years later, in the frozen mountains of Korea, the Chinese command faced a familiar nightmare. Survivors of the 190th Chinese Division described the recapture of Hill 355 as an act of military witchcraft. Under a blinding blizzard, 18 scouts emerged like specters, infiltrating so quickly that the sentinels barely had time to fire. To the defenders, it didn't seem like a small platoon, but an elite force sent to punish every tactical error with silent surgical death. Chinese panic reached its peak during 7 massive counterattacks over 3 days. Officers reported that the hill was cursed. Canadian mortar fire fell on their heads with impossible precision. What the enemy didn't know was that Major was coordinating the bombardment directly onto his own position, sacrificing safety for total impact. To the thousands of retreating Chinese soldiers, Major was a demon summoning hellfire to protect a frozen ground, turning numbers into a meaningless statistic. Major's return to Canada was marked by a modest silence, a stark contrast to the chaos he left in his wake. He became the only soldier to receive the Distinguished Conduct Medal in 2 separate wars, a feat that enemy officers would study with a mix of dread and reverence. For those who faced him, he was a blunt force that defied the odds, a man who entered history as the nightmare of 1,000 uniforms, leaving a legacy written in the fear and respect of his foes. In the archives of the Wehrmacht and Chinese reports, Major's name remained a reminder that audacity can paralyze divisions. Old adversaries recalled the pirate not with hatred, but with the respect one has for an inevitable phenomenon. They knew they had survived an encounter with the impossible. For the enemy, the image of the lone scout on the horizon became the ultimate symbol of a defeat that began in the mind, proving that fear is the most potent weapon on the battlefield.